Two guys after my own heart. Michael and Matt here on Bellular Clips have regularly been derailing off topic, but they got me today with the title Misconceptions of Final Fantasy XIV. So Chad voted for that one to see. Let's see what they have for us. I have been loving these posts. They make a lot of interesting things to think about, whether I disagree with them or agree with them. They have their journey into introducing Michael Bellular himself into 14, while Matt, kind of his Sherpa, has been guiding that journey. It's been really fun to watch, and I do want to just say I really appreciate the amount that they have been publishing and sharing that journey. I think total number of clips, they're probably keeping up with the rest of the 14 community combined. It definitely feels like that sometimes. And so it's nice to get to pick and choose the ones that I'm excited about and watch those. Let's get started.
Take it from us. You don't know what you're talking about. It's okay. It's okay, but you don't know what you're talking about.
I actually have... I don't even know what I'll do. I wrote it purely out of my own, I just sat for a couple hours and just mashed my keyboard. But it's this sort of thing of, the misconceptions of FF. Where there's a lot of people like, oh, it's a weeb game. Or well, it's actually not. That's a long story for the minute, but it's not a weeb game because, it doesn't follow any of the, it's not very anime. It's not very, there's a couple parts where it kind of is in, side content, humor, stuff like that. It has, Mikote, but they're not particularly...
They're not that weeby.
They're not that weeby. The Aura, kind of not really.
MMOs also do a really... Big MMOs do a decent job of referencing a lot more than one culture. The localization teams around the world on World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV both make an incredible effort to reference pop culture, to reference other genres. The music across 14 shows incredible breadth. So I think to say 14 is any one thing, Yoshi P was in a recent interview and he was asked about what it was like to be this... I don't remember the exact phrasing of the question, but it was effectively, whether or not it was intended this way, it came across, and at least through translation based on his response, sounds like it hit him as, what is it like being an Eastern developer as far as your Western audience is concerned? It really, I don't think, was meant to be as inflammatory as that sounds, but his response was effectively to that question, to that concept, that are you really kind of anything more than a JRPG maker, which once again I don't think was what the question intended, but translation's hard. And he said, I'm a worldwide developer. We're a worldwide developing team. We have a worldwide audience. And so no, we don't really design specifically for one portion of our audience. We don't design for the way things are done on the Japanese servers or the European servers or the North American servers. That there isn't this well, we're going to make this game, and if other people like it too, that's cool. No. We have a worldwide audience, and we're aware of all of them. And so I don't remember his exact response, but I just remember being really comforted to be reminded, just in case his actions and previous words hadn't drilled the point home, that this game is not a JRPG that happens to have a Western audience. There is a core development team that happens to live in Japan, but they have voice actors from around the world. They have community teams from around the world. Square Enix has a Los Angeles studio. I believe they have another one in London. But it's a worldwide thing, and they take worldwide feedback. It's why when they do fan fests, historically, last one exceeding because of COVID, historically, the way the fan fest have worked for this game is they have a North American, a European, and a Japanese fan fest separately for each of those audiences. So Square Enix has studios all over the world. Montreal is where Deus Ex came out of, and now one of the new Guardians of the Galaxy is going to be coming out of. And so, Square Enix is all over the place. 14 is all over the place. And so when people assume that any MMO that has had success of this level is a monolith, whichever MMO it is, WoW or 14 being the two biggest that people talk about, they're not that easy to sum up. Not all WoW players and 14 players are one thing, and the game as a result, cannot just be one thing.
The LFLs are a little weeby, but then not really too bad. And then you've got like, I'm trying to think. It is traditionally Final Fantasy, because the original Final Fantasies weren't weeb at all, and their language kind of divorced from the rest of like Japanese culture stuff.
Oh, big, yeah.
Where you've got weeb, like, you know, if you're playing Scarlet Nexus, if you're playing Astral Chain, some of the trope stuff about like characters in like Tales games, etc., and kind of RPGs, you'll feel a lot of those. Like a weeb game is Hyperdimension Neptunia. That's a fucking weeb game. That's a game where you cannot enjoy that unless you're so deep in weebery you forget who you are.
And I think we can have overlap, right? There's definitely aspects of this community that like Genshin Impact, that like manga, that watch anime. There are people that said, you know, hey, I'm really into a lot of Japanese culture and a lot of things that come out of it. Will I like this game? And somebody goes, yeah. But then there's also people like me that don't have a huge history with anime or manga, and Genshin didn't really hit me as something that I needed to stick with, and other, you know, heavily more Japanese-based games haven't always been that big draw to me. And when you say, well, will you like this game? The answer is still, yeah. And so it is definitely not something where people who, whether they like the term or not, have been put under the term weeb, are comfortable. That doesn't mean it has to be everybody. And so, you know, that's just like saying that all people who play WoW raid, and that all people who play Guild Wars 2 either raid or do PvP, that all people who play, you know, any game are one thing. Just the statement, all people who do this activity are this. It's so perfect, it's so whole, that it doesn't leave any room for the exceptions. And I'm not talking about the 1 in 10,000, the 1 in a million. I'm talking about whole sub-communities that can exist. It dismisses entire groups of people who may not only not fit into that main category, but may actively dislike that main category and share a love for the same game.
Yeah.
Honestly, like, sorry, it'll do. So I think that shows where I am. But it's not a weeb game. It's like, it's kind of what I wanted eventually talk about, but like with Berserk's influence on stuff, especially FF. It's like, yeah, it's all that Western fantasy, but the Japanese really loved it in the 80s, and they took a little bit of a spin on it.
Yeah.
But it's so different from your general anime. Like, FF14 never feels like a shonen anime.
Keep in mind that when 1.0 was failing, or did fail, whatever the timeline on that is, and it became clear that they were going to need to do something different, and they brought in Yoshi P, who called 1.0 an unprecedented disaster, I believe was his exact words. When you talk about that, and he said, okay, well, let's look out at the space. Let's see what else is out there. As somebody who plays, or, you know, and played a lot of WoW, and is an enormous fan of Diablo, Yoshi P, of course, looked to Blizzard, who were having massive success at the time. And he looked to others too. And the, you know, Western-based MMOs were crushing it. And so Final Fantasy XIV, at its core, at its foundation, has a lot of WoW inspiration. Now, for WoW fans, WoW from Vanilla to Shadowlands are two different games. It is very hard to see a lot of the core features from how much they have shifted by going left and right and left and right until like the middle, it just isn't there anymore. And it's where the interest from Classic came from, is it's not satisfied by that. 14A hasn't had as many expansions, so it can only have gone so far. And B, it doesn't take these hard swings left and right from expansion to expansion. 6.0 is seen to be, at its core, going to be just the core skeleton of the expansion will be a lot like 5.0, which was a lot like 4.0, which was a lot like 3.0, which was a lot like 2.0. Yes, there are changes. Yes, there are certain jobs that have seen big swings from one expansion to another when they felt that they needed an overhaul. the relic system has swung really far when we moved from go grind some fates to being in this whole zone that's its own giant thing. There are these moments where they say it's time for this one thing to change, but we have not had enough of those, and they don't have a desire to do enough of those in these rapid successions where you see a massive change to rating and classes and loot. They don't do that. And so yes, Shadowbringers is not a Realm Reborn, but a Realm Reborn was heavily inspired from World of Warcraft and Western-based MMOs. And we have only gone so far from what a Realm Reborn was at the time to where we are now. I think all, in my mind, are the vast majority of the things are for the positive. But the core there means that, like, inherently, it can't just be a weeb game, because that's not even where its inspiration came from. Yes, the narrative came from the fact that it has Final Fantasy written on the door. And so they want to be respectful of that core big narrative development. And WoW obviously couldn't be an inspiration for how to handle a mainline story. But all of those MMO elements, all the things such as class design, gearing, inventory, content design, side content options, all of those things are heavily inspired by other successful MMOs over the years, where they have said, hey, I really like what they're doing, I really want to avoid what they're doing, let's take our unique ideas and what we've learned from those and let's make our game.
Which is what people will call weeb. People will call it weeb whenever it's like, there's maybe a couple moments that would like evoke some of the same feelings, but it's never a weeb game. Like, it's not a weeb game. If you're saying that, you are failing to define weeb enough. You're using the fact that it's Japanese.
They don't. It's like the people who would say that wouldn't know the difference between like weeaboo and otaku.
Yeah, I mean, like, well, there's a decent bit of overlap. There's like
overlap, but I
that's
feel
huge
like
overlap generally. But
no, there's huge overlap. But from what I understand, the definition of that has always been like a degree of engagement in the fandom, and then there's like slightly different connotations to both.
I guess it's the case of otaku literally means like someone who's like a hyper fan of something.
Okay.
So it more the
that could be fucked up. And
yeah, the connotations over time is of like an anime otaku is the default for saying otaku. Like you say otaku and someone goes, oh, someone who's like
they're getting way off in the weeds.
My fucking self. And someone who's like, oh yeah, there's a load of like they're listening to Love Live songs on the walk. Fucking, they're sitting on the train. They're listening to idol stuff. They'll go buy a load of merch. They'll go home and they've got like idol posters and stuff like that. All that stuff is like kind of synonymous, but it's more the fact that I feel like people just look and go, oh, it's like I wouldn't call it racist because it's not, because it's just about cultural stuff, which I don't think kind of fits that bill really too well. But it's not weeb. It's a Japanese game. Doesn't make it weeb. Learn your if you want to communicate, learn the definitions of the words you're saying, learn how they're used, learn how they feel, and then actually use them. Because otherwise, your criticism is lazy and means nothing. Because if you're calling FF a weeb game, you're not engaging with it in any capacity, and your criticism can be thrown instantly in the bin.
Yeah, so there's half of Asmongold's chat are coming for you.
Yeah.
But I agree entirely, yeah.
I spend a lot of time in Asmongold's stream watching. I love the energy in his chat.
Communities are very diverse. I will say this last few weeks, as we've gotten more into having these conversations around reaction content, and as comment sections I have been personally reminded that when you choose to do reaction content, when you choose to tag somebody else, you don't just invite in the people who like that chat. You also invite people in who don't like that chat and don't like the person you're reacting to. And so one community is not one thing. And Asmongold's chat gets summed up into this person that doesn't exist, this one person that is this unique thing. And it's a massive community. And so, to say like Asmongold's chat isn't gonna like you, and he's like, but I'm in Asmongold's chat. Do I not like me?
But people who are anti-weeb for no good reason, fuck off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Simple as. Try to be reasonable. Try to be reasonable and engage with things properly. It's like
But that's not emotionally satisfying.
Yeah.
In the moment, that's the thing.
That's actually perfect. Virtual Souls, which is a good name, says 14 is weeb in the same way Dark Souls is weeb. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
14 is more inspired by like
they call Mikote furries.
Of course, yeah. Well, that's wrong because
WoW is that's the people say FF's a furry.
So I'm actually disappointed with how cat-like Makote are. I really like when I go through character development, picking something that does not exist in the real world, picking something that leans into the fantasy of it. I love druids. I love mages that feel like they're constantly surrounded. Not these single big focused moments, but constantly surrounded by magic. I love this mythical, magical world that I can go be in. It doesn't have to be based in reality. And I will say that until Hrothgar were added, I've been really disappointed with how humanoid things are. So this whole like Makote or furries thing, I'm actually a little bit disappointed that they're not more bestial. Not in a furry where that starts to mean something different type way, but like in WoW I can play a cow. I can play a half goat person. I can now play a fox. Not because they make sense, but for the same reasons I can play a goblin or a true orc. Like a Rogadin is just a big human. An orc is not. And, I don't want an elf to just be long ears. I want there to be something about them that is mystical, right? They've lived for thousands of years. What is that? Somebody who walks around as part bear or part wolf. I want to suspend disbelief for a moment. And honestly, Catboys and Catgirls, for me, for as much as they get ripped on by other communities, for me, I wanted it to be more of, some of the, Morrowind, where I can play I have a cat head. Like, I'm just a cat. Let's go all the way into that. Something like Khajiit, yes.
Furry game. World of Warcraft is so much more a furry game than FF14.
Yeah, because
much more.
Which races in FF could be considered furry? The Hrothgar.
Mr. John himself says this man's in denial about it being a weeb game. You don't fucking understand what you're talking about. You literally take it from us. You don't know what you're talking about. It's okay. It's okay, but you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's okay, but you don't know.
Yeah, that's just essentially it. But in terms of furries, like Hrothgar furries, because they're fur head to toe. Viera, I'm pretty sure their skin is like regular skin. They're just got bunny ears and tail and characteristics. Not furry. Well, maybe. The old definition as far...
I was super disappointed that Viera did not have some facial options where I was more bunny-like. They really just look a lot more humanoid than I had hoped for.
Whereas fucking aging myself so badly here. But the old definition is 10%. That was the accepted definition among people back in the day, back in the early 2000s. It's 10%. If it's ears and tail, not a furry. Anything else, a little bit. Like Felicia from Darkstalkers, who has big paws, ears, tail, and some like fur that's kind of acting as clothing. That's definitely like...
Let's get some feet.
But by that definition, furry.
Paws.
But then...
And claws.
But then you go to World of Warcraft, like Worgen, Volpera, Tauren.
So on that, we do have a super, actually. It's from
Right,
Moonky Junkie, who says, if FF is a weeb game, you would have to admit that WoW is a furry game with Worgen, Draenei, Volpera, Pandaren, and Tauren. Just say.
Now, the counter there is that, keep in mind, he's naming Volpera and all of that. They have not always been there. So, like, the Tauren have always been there. I don't know if he's about to say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so usually people are talking about races that were added later. And when Asmongold was referenced, Asmongold is very anti all of the furry races that he sees people choosing to focus on when they talk about Final Fantasy XIV. And they say, well, WoW has the same thing. Keep in mind that many times people like that, Asmon included, make fun of the races in WoW too. They weren't a fan of Volpera being added. So it's not a double standard because they aren't real thrilled they're in their game either. They were just playing their game from before those were added, and so they've learned to tolerate that, Tauren excluded.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, if you're going to call FF14 it's the sort of thing, weebs will like FF14. Doesn't make FF14 a weeb game.
Yeah.
Furries will like World of Warcraft because it has furry-like things in it. You can play an anthro character, whatever. Yeah. But it doesn't mean that WoW is a furry game. Because it's not like I log into World of Warcraft and, it's all the single furries is just being sang in chat or, anything like that. So, Yes.
Yeah.
Definitions. Oh, we're really good at making definitions for each other and then half fucking killing each other over them. And sometimes literally killing each other over them.
Yep.
Humans are great.
So that was one of the major misconceptions. Is people are like, oh, weeb game. You're like, if you don't know what a weeb game actually means and you're using it just as a buzzword, that's fine. But your criticism can be thrown out because you don't understand.
Yeah.
I think it's as simple as that. If you want to criticize a game, absolutely, by all means, just do it properly. Just criticize it for what it's what.
Yeah,
like,
because it's really easy to criticize
Yeah.
FF14, as it
Yeah.
turns out.
Yeah, it is full of problems, and also it is a creative endeavor. If you don't like it, then so what?
So Mogbit
Yep.
supers us saying,
That's a little oversimplistic. If you don't like it, so what? An MMO is something that you play in part of the value proposition of MMO that appeals to many of the players is that you're going to invest into a character, you're going to pay them continually to update the game, and you're going to see progress in that character over a long time. So when you're talking about somebody who picks up the game for the first time, plays for 10 hours, 100 hours, and says, I don't like it, and then they leave, then sure. So what? You tried it, find something else, tell me what you didn't like about it, maybe I can help recommend where you can go. When you talk about somebody who's been playing a game for 2, 5, 10 years, and then it's a creative endeavor, if you don't like it anymore, just quit, that's not fair. And I don't think that's what he meant to say, but that statement getting made sometimes lacks that clarity, and sometimes that statement then is something that gets carried into situations where it doesn't belong. Simply not liking something, there's a lot of context lacking from that statement. So I would just say that be really careful with just being, well, then just quit. Like if you like, 14 players have regularly said, well, if you like WoW so much, just go play WoW. That's not what I'm saying. Just because WoW did something better, right? So you're in a relationship with somebody and you note, hey, I noticed this thing that this other couple did and I thought it was pretty cool. Maybe we could do that. And they say, well, if you like them so much, why don't you just go date one of them? Great. That's awesome. I'm glad we're having a conversation here. Like, really great. That is not at all what I said, but sure, we're here now. Thank you. Like that doesn't help anything. When we have a friend of a friend who is, their spouse is really struggling with some things right now. And the things they're struggling with are making them a person in their actions and in their behaviors that is different than that person married. That just quit mentality, well then just leave. That doesn't stop them being years and years invested into that. So when we talk about games like MMOs, I would just try to, and I'm not perfect at it, take the edge off of those. It's a creative endeavor, so just if you don't like it, just ignore it. Because this isn't a YouTube channel you came across once or twice. These are massive enterprises that many people have been supporting with hundreds or thousands of dollars and hundreds or thousands of hours. And so when they see it going a direction they don't like, when they see a feature they wish was different, when they see the game struggling across the board or something like that, they don't want to just quit. They want to like it. They want it to be the thing that got them there in the first place. And they're venting this frustration because they're hoping that will help offer some feedback that will get it back to where it was. It's not just quit. Criticism and feedback does not mean dislike. I have criticized the things that I don't like about 14 plenty during the last 5 years of content creation. But the fact that I play and talk about this game more than any other game, the fact that I have been involved in channels that at this point are at 2,000 or 3,000 Final Fantasy 14 videos, and it is a huge portion of my streaming schedule, like the fact that I have paid my own money to go to events, that I have bought collector's editions of this, that I have continually recommended the free trial, like there are actions as a general trend that say this guy probably likes Final Fantasy 14, and one moment of I wish the housing system was better, or one moment of I wish communication around something was handled better, doesn't immediately throw all that in the bin. Feelings are complex. So I do think that was just one offhand statement he made at the end of a clip where they were having a good time talking about stuff. But it opens up a much larger conversation of these are creative endeavors but they are also business propositions. We are also asking people to form trust and a relationship in a continuous monetary sense, where we're asking for an upfront fee followed by $15 a month for a full 2 years to support a content cycle. And because they don't like it, there is a bit of an unwritten contract there that I am paying you to develop things in the future that I will like, and that you are listening to me to help get it there. And so that really, that well, then just don't play then overlooks a huge portion of that.
So then, by the 10% definition, the aura are scalies.
By that definition, yes.
There we go.
Yes.
There we go.
Absolutely.
We've worked it out.
I imagine the goalposts have probably moved a little bit in general. So I think most people, I think a lot of people would say no, but by the old definition that I grew up on, weirdly enough, they definitely are.
Well, thank you guys. I think we all learned a little bit more about what a weeb is. And so it wasn't really focused on the game, but definitely they stayed on subject. Misconceptions of Final Fantasy XIV. It just wasn't necessarily about the game itself. It was just about Final Fantasy XIV, kinda.